Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Quill and Hammer Reforging Fiction. I'm Trevor. This is Zach. Zach, how we doing?
We're doing great today because today we're going to be talking about Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. We're going to be talking about what was good, what was bad, and how we would fix it.
Absolutely. Now, Zach, we love these books and these movies, and we're talking about the movie today. What worked for you in the movie? What were things that stood out about the Prisoner of Azkaban?
Well, I think things that were good about the Prisoner of Azkaban is, they made the action a little bit more kind of focused than it was in the book, right? You have thematic elements about the Dementors that really kind of bring that fear and that dread into it that maybe weren't quite noticed in the book. And it's just little things, like when the Dementors are boarding the train and they start freezing everything around them, and you see the glass on the train window start to fog up. That doesn't necessarily happen in the book, but it brings that added sense of dread into um into the film, right?
Right.
And so I feel like as far as the Dementors go, they really did a good job of making them scary, and they fill you with dread, and it gives you that sense of fear that Harry has with regards to the Dementors.
Right. No, I agree. I they captured the essence of what the Dementors meant. What else though? What else besides the Dementors? What were, some things that you really liked about the movie?
Nothing. No, I'm kidding. Um,
Yeah. You know what I like about you, Zeke? Yeah, nothing. Uh-huh. Right.
Nothing.
Yeah.
No, I mean, as far as it goes, it's a good film. The pacing is good. The issue they have once again is this book is longer and you have to condense certain plot points. Um you have to choose which things you're going to include. Um, but as far as making a good film, it's a good engaging film. The if you were to watch this without ever reading the books, everything makes sense. You have the intrigue of things like, okay, well, who is this Peter Pettigrew guy? Why is he dead? Um, how is he still showing up on the Marauders map? Um, things like that. The time turner, when Harry and Hermione go back in time at the end of the film. I mean, that's really exciting. It's fun to see the events play out the first time and then to see them from a different perspective. I think that was um, a good film device to show just a different perspective of all the different events, right?
Right.
Um, and the other thing that I think they did really well that maybe doesn't get talked about enough is their representation of the Marauders map. I thought it was really clever. In the book, you have just they're just dots with the names above them, but to have it be a multi-folded piece of parchment with the footsteps going in every direction, like it felt more like a magical artifact than just a single piece of paper, right?
Right. Well, I was thinking the same thing. Hogwarts is supposed to be huge, right?
Right.
And with that, it kind of is like how do you fit everything onto one page? Now, granted, you can interpret magical whatever
Hmm.
however you want, but I agree. I really liked how they did that. Um, because it makes you really understand how big Hogwarts is on just a small piece of paper. Like you could fold and look at that and all of those any different way to figure that out.
Right.
I thought that was really cool. But let's shift gears because this isn't you know a Harry Potter fanboy movie fanboy thing, even though it is. But let's talk
It
about
is.
what would we fix? What starting at the beginning of the movie, what didn't work for you, and how would you address that?
Well, maybe this is a little bit of a nitpicky thing, but the whole reason that Harry runs off in the beginning of the film is because he loses his emotions. The the glass breaks first earlier in the week, and then he blows up his Aunt Marge, right? And he
Right,
thinks, well, I've used magic. I got the warning last year. I guess I'm on my own now, so I'm just going to pack up and leave anyway, right?
right.
But in the absolute opening scene, he's using magic
Yeah,
to do his homework. It's like, how did they overlook that? And you can say, okay, yeah, sure, it was a cool looking scene to have, Harry doing Lumos, and then he gets it to work, and it kind of shoots out the window, and you see the Harry Potter logo. Like, yeah, it was a cool moment as far as film goes, but like you're messing with the plot here. You know what I mean? Like you're not being consistent, you
right.
know. So maybe that's a little nitpicky,
No, no.
but
It starts, it all starts somewhere,
it
right?
all starts somewhere.
But it throws off the I mean, think of the things, Dobby shows up in book two. They have this whole whatever. He's not supposed to do magic. Now, granted, you know, they didn't show in Chamber of Secrets, the letter from the ministry and all of that. They just kind of show that, you know, uh, Uncle Vernon is locking Harry into the bedroom.
Right,
But the point being, that was it was like, yeah, you're not supposed to do magic. If you do it again, you're going to be expelled. Okay,
right,
so he didn't even do magic. It was someone else, but then they sensed it and everything, went wrong. And then that's why he's worried so much about, you know, well, I lost control. I blew up my aunt. I have to get out of here
right,
because I'm a fugitive now.
right,
And so they run away or he runs away. The night bus finds him. They take him to the, leaky cauldron. And then you meet Cornelius Fudge. And I feel like he did a good job with setting that tone of like, oh, Harry, we don't expel people for blowing up their aunt or send them to Azkaban or whatever he says.
right,
I thought that
right.
was really, really good. And so like up to that point, that is my only nitpicky thing. It's
Hmm.
like I know you have to cut so much out because there's just too much to put in for the
Right.
rest of the book to focus on anything more than just a little tiny bit up to that point.
You know, maybe this is a little nitpicky too, but in the book, Harry first hears about Sirius Black on the radio or the television. Um, and the reason is because Sirius Black is such a, a serious threat, uh,
Ah, I see
that
what you did there.
he's such a threat that they had to get the Muggle minister. What do they call him in England? The
Prime
prime
Minister.
minister, the prime minister involved, and say, hey, we've got this maniac on the loose, and so the Muggles were even talking about it, right?
Right.
And that's a pretty nitpicky thing, but it helps it helps illustrate how dangerous they think Sirius really is.
Right. No, oh, I do agree with that. That did miss a certain whatever that makes it, you know, it sets the tone again. It's like the Dementors. They set the tone. You have to figure out why they're so, dangerous or whatever. But Sirius is dangerous.
Right,
Sirius, he escaped Azkaban. You kind of don't really understand how crazy that is.
right.
And this is something we'll talk about later when we get to the end. I wish they would have explained how Sirius did it more, like
Right,
we and to be fair, I feel like book one and two, Sorcerer's Stone and Chamber of Secrets, they did a fantastic job of keeping, you know, fairly close to the plot of the book.
hmm
Or maybe not the plot of the book, to the pacing of the book. They didn't leave much
right,
out. We talked about that in our last two episodes. But from here on out, you need like Lord of the Rings extended edition versions to get everything in that you need. You need an
right,
extra hour or hour and a half, to fit everything that we want to fit in. So this isn't a criticism of that because you only have so much time to work with to put the content in and tell the story as best you can. But my first thing is to say you need extra time. And so
right,
when I'm approaching this, when we approach this and talk about the real plot points and the meat of everything that we would fix, that's my understanding is that moving forward with Harry Potter, we're doing super extended versions to make the best films that we can possible.
right, right,
Screw the time constraints because there's just too much to get in with. So to begin with, for me, I wish they would have spent more time, like you said, setting up why Sirius is a bad threat or is a threat or the perception of it. Because really, it's like Sirius is bad. He's a bad guy. He was a supporter of you know who.
right.
Okay. All right. Well, uh, but why? And I can't remember in the book. I'm trying to think, when do you actually find out he was Harry's godfather? He was, Lily and James' friend. I feel like that's like mid-book, a big plot point, but
Yeah, it's pretty mid-book. They they changed the way Harry figures it out a little bit, but it happens in the Three Broomsticks, and he overhears Fudge, Hagrid, and what's her name, the Madame Rosmerta, is
mhm.
that her name?
Yeah,
Um, they're all talking about it, just like in the movie, but in a little bit of a different setting. Harry and Ron and Hermione were sitting next to their table, and Harry hides under the table to hear the conversation, basically. But
right,
yes, as far as pacing goes, it's about mid-book where they find out all those plot points.
right. But you have all of that set up. He's dangerous. He's escaped. Um, he's a Hogwarts thing.
Mhm.
Um, Ron's dad, Mr. Weasley, comes in and says, he thinks that by killing you, he will bring back, Voldemort, that kind of stuff. It sets the tone for why Harry needs to be careful. And
Right,
and that's kind of overlooked a little bit. You kind of don't really notice that
right,
throughout the movie. But then I feel like the next thing that we need to focus on is Hermione, and the Time Turner. You
Okay.
don't really, I mean, I feel like they do a good job of like, where did she come from? That kind of,
Hmm.
but you don't really realize how that affects her throughout the film,
Hmm.
right? And I feel like, we talked last time how they kind of do Ron dirty by turning him into just the comic relief and ignoring
Hmm.
all the heroic things that he does, his friendship with Harry. They kind of downplay a lot of his strengths and really
Right.
reduce him to, eh, he's kind of a comedic relief tool. He's kind of just there.
Right.
He was in the books, so you can't exclude him, but I feel like they turn Hermione too much into the only competent one in the book
Hmm.
and or in the movies. And really, you need to show how frazzled she gets and how she's human, Zach. She
Right.
is human.
Right.
And even though she is the, brightest witch of her year or whatever, the smartest, the best, you don't really see over the course of the year she's getting more and more ragged. She's, splitting herself too far. You don't see any of that. And I feel like it's important to show that, like, yeah, she is, we all know she's a flawed character when by reading the books, but it's like, show her struggling with something
Right.
because everything comes naturally to her, or not comes naturally to her, but it's like she has no weaknesses almost throughout the entire
Right.
film. And it bothers me because the entire point of all three of them is that together you know, Hermione is the book smart, Ron is can we call it the street smart?
Yeah.
Wizard
Yeah.
street smart, like he understands the wizarding world, the practical sides of things.
Hmm.
Hermione gets the book smart or whatever, and then Harry, you know, is Harry.
Right.
Kind of just he's the schmuck in the middle that has to know all of the information, and so they're feeding both of, getting it from both sides so he can, learn how wizards act and all of that, but like learn what he needs. And
Right.
you have that dynamic of, you put us into Harry's position almost because we don't know anything about the wizarding world. And so,
Right.
or magic or anything. So you have Hermione explaining the spells and being good at that and the book stuff. And then you've got Ron explaining the other stuff, and Harry is new to all of it. So we have to,
Right.
so I feel like that is something that is missed. And I would begin with that, in of course in the earlier books, but I'd like to show that yeah, Hermione has weaknesses, and
Right.
that's why Ron is needed to help fill those weaknesses and create a cohesive unit rather than just, well, Hermione's good at everything and we need someone who can be a monkey and make him laugh, but Harry's you know the title character, so it can't be him. So
Right.
let's make fun of the redhead.
And I take issue with that because I have a redhead.
I know,
Redheads are great.
right?
The Weasley family is great, and I don't want to hear any garbage about the Weasley family,
Well,
especially from Malfoy.
yeah, I would kill Malfoy. He's that stupid, pure blood nonsense. Don't
Not
get
having
me
it.
started.
Okay, but another thing that I would focus on is the rift that happens between Ron, Hermione, and Harry, Ron, and Hermione.
Right,
And it starts with Crookshanks going after Scabbers, who is secretly Peter Pettigrew.
right,
And the the whole point is that Crookshanks was in cahoots with Sirius as Padfoot and knows that Peter Pettigrew is a bad dude. And so she's trying to get him, right?
Right.
And that puts a rift between Ron and Hermione. You see Scabbers getting more and more emaciated and sickly, and like she makes a point about explaining that in the book that it's like Scabbers is not looking good, and Ron chalks it up to Crookshanks being after him, right?
Right.
But in reality, Peter is scared to death, right?
Right.
Um, and then the next part of the rift between the three of them is the firebolt. The firebolt in the movie comes in at the very end of the film, and it comes with a feather from Buckbeak, the hippogriff. So Harry knows who it's from, and he and Hermione kind of have this little like this was with it type thing, like
Right.
we know who's it from, right? But in the book, it comes at Christmas time, and they don't know who it's from. It happens after Harry's Nimbus 2000 blows into the Whomping Willow, and the the firebolt comes. They don't know who it's from. Harry and Ron are absolutely stoked about it, but Hermione is thinking, well, it could have come from Sirius Black, which it, funny enough, actually did.
It did. Uh-huh.
But she's worried about it being jinxed as a way for Sirius to covertly get to Harry, right?
Right.
And McGonagall confiscates it and runs all sorts of tests on it to look for jinxes, charms, all that sort of thing. But in the meantime, Ron and Harry are absolutely livid with Hermione, right?
Right.
And I think there are two things here that are important to the development of their trio dynamic is number one, it shows how a little immature Ron and Harry still are,
Right.
not being able to see past the fancy new broom. But then it shows also how fragile Hermione is, again, showing the flaws in her character,
Right.
because Harry and Ron are kind of the only two that she has, right?
Yeah.
And it takes a toll on her when she doesn't have the two of them, right? And you see that in the book that she's having a really, really hard time.
Right.
And then when they finally make up, she throws her arms around Ron and starts crying, it's like that was a big deal. Like that was a growth moment for the trio that they
Right.
just kind of smooth over. There's one little scene where Ron and Hermione are bickering. They're not even in a fight. They're just bickering about, well, we don't know where Scabbers is, and I think it was Crookshanks.
Right.
And it's like, okay, they,
All right. Right. Yeah.
but there's none of the growth that you see in the book between the trio. You miss that in the films.
You
And
you do.
and I think that was an important thing to show, and with film or TV series adaptations of these large books, I think the danger that you run into is just showing the big set piece moments. And what you miss is the character development. And really, that's what we care about. You might
Right.
not realize it. You go to a Marvel film and there's all this action and it's fun, but the reason why you like it, even if you don't realize it, is because of the character development.
Right.
You have to see the growth in a character to be invested in something,
Right.
because at the end of the day, we're all flawed people, and seeing these characters overcome their flaws gives us a sense of hope as humans. It gives us inspiration to overcome our own flaws, right? And when you have such a large book and you're trying to show all of the plot points, you miss the subtle growth of the characters, which is really what people enjoy about films. That's what makes films, books, any kind of media good, is the development of the characters, not just the set pieces.
Right.
I don't
And
know why I don't know why I went on such a philosophical rant right then, but
I I don't know why I lied just then.
I don't know why I lied just then.
No, I agree. And to continue that rant a little bit, not the it wasn't that big of a rant. To continue that tangent, it's our problem with a lot of recent movies. It's our problem with sequels. You miss the essence, the character growth. You miss what makes that person or that movie special.
Right.
You, it's like um trying to think of a recent example. Well, let's say it's like Captain Marvel versus Iron Man.
Right.
Iron Man, Tony Stark is a deeply flawed person.
Hmm.
Even at the end of the movie, he is deeply flawed, right?
Right.
Throughout, from Iron Man to Endgame, he is a flawed person doing the best that he can, and you see that character growth from where he is, as the stuck-up playboy genius who doesn't really, I mean, how he is in book one,
Book
uh,
one.
but throughout the entire series, he's learning, he's growing, all of them are. And and they're still flawed. It
Right.
takes it takes, from 2008 to when did Endgame come out? Was it like
2019.
yeah, so you're looking at 11-year arc and 20 movies that over the course of that time he becomes the guy who sacrifices himself to save the entire world,
Right.
right? And then you have and if you like Captain Marvel, great. Uh but it just felt like to me when we watched it, she didn't have any flaws. She was just overpowered, you know. She didn't have
Overpowered with
any character
amnesia.
growth.
Well, it was the you're a girl and people tell you you can't do anything. And that was her flaw, I guess. But
Right,
that's not really a flaw. It was other people's flaws looking at her and not seeing how perfect Captain Marvel was.
right.
And that for that reason it just doesn't resonate. You know
It
what I mean? It's boring. She's not a believable character, and at least for me, it's a very forgettable film
right,
because nothing of note happens within her character arc.
right. Well, and that's the point is we can all see ourselves as Tony Stark, or we can see ourselves as Steve Rogers,
Right.
this underpowered, scrawny guy who wants to, fight, wants to do, what is right, wants to protect his country and be important or whatever, and is just not. And then something extraordinary happens, and then you go through and he's doing all of these things and he's growing and despite having the powers, he is still flawed and he's still learning and growing and becoming better and you know that is what you miss in Iron Man or in between Iron Man and some of the other things that come up, but that is what we're missing in that Hermione Ron arc. Ron doesn't really have any character growth
Hmm.
because they've reduced him to the buffoon the dancing monkey, and then Hermione's growth doesn't really happen because she's just good at everything.
Right.
And so you don't see any of that, and you can't really resonate with either of them throughout the film because Hermione is just perfect, Ron is just a clown, and
Hmm.
you miss that character growth. You can't put yourself in Ron's position and say, I kind of agree with Ron here.
Right.
Hermione is, but then you can't put yourself in Hermione's situation where she's clearly overworked and she's alone and everyone's mad at her, and it starts at the beginning, like that rift starts when she buys Crookshanks, you
Yep.
know. And then you've got Ron and he's saying, "Your cat is the reason my rat is sick." And it's like, "No, he was sick before and getting worse and probably, the cat probably didn't help, but he wasn't the reason that Scabbers was getting sick." And like all of that stuff that you miss, the little interplays, the character growth, it doesn't happen.
Right.
And I think that's the biggest flaw is no one really grows throughout the film.
So, stepping away from our problems with the films, what would you do to illustrate that? If you had more time, if you could make a Lord of the Rings double extended edition, what would you do? How would you show that? And what moments would you change? What would you add? What would you take out?
So the to begin with, because yeah, we love the wizarding world and the plot and all of that is interesting, but it's the character growth that we're interested in. You need to show all of those things. You need to show Harry's growth and character arc where he realizes, he starts at I have no idea who Sirius Black is, and then over the course of the year he realizes he was the one who betrayed my parents. He's going to try and kill him, all of that kind of stuff. And then you get to the end and you have to have something that overcomes all of the anger and the false beliefs that he, sees to get to where he believes Sirius is innocent. But
Right.
that doesn't happen. The only thing they say is, nope, Peter Pettigrew is alive.
Hmm.
But to be fair, they do a better job with Harry's growth than anyone else's, which makes sense because he is the main character of the series.
Right.
But you can see, he has conversations with Lupin about, you're not weak, that Dementors affect you because of this, et cetera, et cetera. But then you need to really begin and show, you know, Ron's rat sick to begin with. It's 5 seconds. Show them going into the apothecary. Or even just say like, can't believe you bought that stupid animal. We went in to save Scabbers and you come out with a monster. Something like it's a
Right.
30-second, you know, film little buff to set up that conflict throughout the film. And then you have to have just little reminders, Crookshanks and Ron, throughout the entire thing. I wish they had put in um Sirius's second break in
Yes.
to the castle, because that is another one of those things that you miss. How distraught Hermione is, Ron almost dying. Like it shows that Hermione still loves and cares about both of her friends and needs them,
Right.
but they're still mad and can't. they can't. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but
They
it
can't get over it.
they can't get over it. But it shows like, you know, a little hint that it's not Harry that they're after, that Sirius was after. It was Peter Pettigrew.
Right,
And you know, speaking of things you miss throughout the entire film, you miss those little subtle clues that, you know, if Sirius wanted to kill Harry, Harry would be dead.
right.
But you're after other things. You know, why is Crookshanks after Scabbers, and why is that causing a conflict? And you know, you boil it down to it's it's Hermione and Ron just bickering over a cat, but it's not, you know.
Right.
It's a central point to the entire thing because you learn that Crookshanks is actually a really smart, perceptive animal. She knows that Pettigrew is an animagus, that Sirius was, and that something is not right in the, you know, it's like Crookshanks is the only one that questions why Peter Pettigrew is sleeping with Ron every day.
Right. Right.
You know,
Looking at you, Fred and George.
looking
Where
at
were
you,
you?
Fred and George. Um, which seriously, I think, you know, and maybe this is a going back to the you know, books, but I don't know if that is ever explained. And when we finish the books, we will have to explain that because you can't tell me that um for 12 years, you know, up to that point, Crookshanks has been with the Weasleys.
You mean
And
you mean Scabbers.
or Scabbers, yeah, sorry, Scabbers has been with the Weasleys. And then Fred and George have had the Marauders map. They're in their fifth year in book three.
Mm-hmm.
So they, you know, Filch the or Filch Nick the whatever from Filch, the map from Filch. They figure it out. They've had it since first year. Well, that rat was Percy's rat for 2 years, and then
Mm-hmm.
Ron's for three, and they didn't once notice that there was someone else in Gryffindor Tower this entire time.
It's another, we talked about this a little bit with the Chamber of Secrets, but it's another flaw in the books where you don't you add something in later on in the series, but then it creates retroactive plot holes back in the other books.
Right.
And we'll have to address those when we get to the books. But anyway, continue.
But continuing on. So you miss that conflict, which is a key conflict, um, just as much as Ron being mad at Harry in book four is, you know, a key plot point to Ron's overall character growth from book one to book seven, you know?
Right,
This is one of Hermione's key plot points is that she's always trying to do what's right, even though she's not, you know, like she's a little awkward.
right,
She's a bookworm, she's a nerd, and you miss that throughout the films, but you have to remember she's the insufferable know-it-all that everyone calls a know-it-all, but then they all rally around her when Snape calls her a know-it-all. You know what I
right,
mean? Like,
right,
and so that whole scenario is it just bothers me. You need that for their group to solidify by the end of the series. You need these blips, these things that happen. uh,
Right.
because they happen in real life. Things come up. How many times have you been annoyed with, your friends or your family or whatever? Goodness gracious, Zach, sometimes I am annoying.
Sometimes, yes.
See?
Yes.
We've been brothers our entire life.
Our entire lives we've been
Our
brothers.
entire lives, Zach. As long as you have been alive, I have been your brother.
Whew. Wow.
Crazy,
This is
right?
news to me. News to
And
me.
and during that time, you can't tell me that I haven't been annoying to you and you haven't been annoying to me, you
Right.
know? And that
These
there are
things happen.
things happen. You learn, you grow. That's the thing that bothers me the most. And then, side plots. I wish you would have seen a little bit more of the interplay between Snape and Lupin,
Right.
because you chalk it up to, Snape is, just you don't even really know that they went to school together, or that there's this animosity between the two of them.
Right.
Like, it's kind of a big deal that, you know, Snape kept picking fights with the Marauders, and the Marauders did the same thing. It's a theme throughout the entire, maybe not a theme, it is a subtle, twisted plot point
Right.
throughout the entire film, and I wish you would see a little bit more of that as well, as far as
Well,
character development and yeah,
people talk a lot about the two Snapes, book Snape versus film Snape. And book Snape is a lot less of a good guy than film Snape. Alan Rickman did a fantastic job bringing Snape to life.
yes.
And I shudder to think about the hate that will come to whoever plays the new Snape because he's not going to be Alan Rickman.
Have
And
you, speaking of which, have you seen who the new Snape is?
no, I haven't.
Um, Now granted, I'm gonna say this. I wish I had a picture and I could flash it up on the screen right now. But and I swear I sent you like a reel about it, but they have casted someone as Snape. And dude, there's no way to say without sounding like I am a bit racist, but it's a black man
Right,
playing Snape. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but that's going to cause lots of problems
right,
because then every time you're mad at Snape or Snape does something weird or people have their bias against him because there is clear bias against Snape, the potential is for it to be a race thing, and it's
right.
clearly not a race thing. Snape is a despicable man in the books,
Hmm.
and Alan Rickman does a fantastic job. He does to bring Snape back into a realm of someone that's semi-likable, you know.
Right.
But um but it just bothers me because Snape is supposed to be this oily, long, greasy-haired, up to his nose in the dark arts
Hmm.
jerk, you know? Not a handsome, you know, like suave, like be honest, this is a very handsome black man. You know what I mean? Like like he looks like what you think Dean Thomas should look like when he,
Right.
you know, grows up. And so I don't know why they did that because now everything is going to be, gosh, well, they're racist.
Right.
And so anyway, that just bothers me. But even if, and maybe I could be wrong, maybe it is a smart move because Alan Rickman did such a good job, anyone else would try to
That's a good point.
So maybe I'm judging too much because they could do a fantastic job, and my bias of Snape needing to look like Alan Rickman and portraying him that way is getting in the way of my idea of what Snape should be. I can't
Well, I
remember his
think
name. I wish I could remember his name because he could do a fantastic job, and they could do a great job of making him who he should be.
right.
But
Well, I think the reason why it might feel off is because in the book, J.K. Rowling describes Snape as like extremely pale and sallow-faced and like sunken eyes, like he looks like a corpse almost. At
right,
least when I'm listening to the book, that's the image that comes across.
right,
And so I think that might be where that conflict comes in. But like you said, we'll have to wait and see.
right.
And and they could do a great job and we could be eating our words in a couple years. But
And to be clear, I would be happy to eat my words here because I'm not saying that a black man can't play Snape. I am saying that is not what was described in the books, and I am afraid that you will miss his character because we're all trying not to be racist. Is that fair to say?
I
Like
understand what you mean.
you know what I'm trying to say? I don't know how to say it the right way, but you're not supposed to like Snape. In
Right.
the books, you don't like him. And I don't know. I feel I we'll see, I
We'll
guess.
see how it goes.
Let's not reserve judgment on that because we have little information other than that. But anyway, what were we talking about when I got off topic
Brother,
there?
I don't even know.
Dude, let's regroup.
You
Alan Rickman
derailed
did a
us hard.
fantastic job.
Yes, he did. Um, I guess where I was going was going back again to character development and relationships between characters. When in the book, when you miss the I guess sort of side plot of Snape and James back in the day, when you miss that context, then you miss the reason why Harry and Snape hate each other so much. And in the book, they hate each other a lot more than you see in the films.
Right,
And I think that context is important. It's like, why would an adult man be taking out this much anger on a 13-year-old boy,
right,
right? Like it's like he's evil for the sake of being evil.
right.
But
So this is something that I didn't even think about until just now, but we need to make sure that we go back, if we're redoing the entire series, we have to go back to the Sorcerer's Stone when when Dumbledore explains that Professor Snape saved Harry, hoping that, you know,
right,
remember
right.
how he says, they didn't like each other, just like you and Malfoy don't. And then your father did something that Snape could never forgive. He saved his life.
Hmm.
And so you miss that, and that's a key context clue for what happens here, right?
Right,
So
right.
that's the entire thing. Snape can't get over his bias and see, gosh, and we've been chatting for a long time and probably should wrap this up. So let's get to the end of the book for the next little bit and say we miss these character things, but then the culmination of everything. the culmination of the movie, they are in the Shrieking Shack, gosh. And that entire conversation, all of the clues, everything that you're learning, you expect to come to a head. And and granted, I don't know how you do it without having it be this huge information dump,
Right.
but they need you need all of that context. You need to know that, yeah, uh the secret keeper stuff.
Hmm.
That Sirius, as good as killed, his parents, which is what he said I as good as killed them, but not for the reason you think. I thought, who would suspect, Peter Pettigrew to be the spy,
Right.
you know? And that's why Lupin didn't know. That's why Dumbledore didn't know. It's because at the very end of the movie, Sirius, or not at the very end of the movie, but when all of this was going down, when the Potters went into hiding and they, decided to do they call it the Fidelius charm, the secret keeper
Hmm.
kind of thing,
Hmm.
that they hide, or they put the secret into Pettigrew instead of Sirius, and no one is told. It was
Right.
the four of them were in on it. And so everyone thinks that, but everyone knew they were going to be using that secret keeper charm. At least, the Order of the Phoenix did.
Hmm.
And so that's why everyone knows it was Sirius Black who betrayed them. But everyone knew that Sirius was James' best friend, so of course that's who would be the secret keeper.
Right.
And so it was a brilliant move to put it into someone other than Sirius, and they chose the wrong person, but you don't see that. And you
Yep.
don't have that explanation. And you don't have Lupin explaining that, no, I was wrong, and I guess Sirius thought I was supposed to be the mole, you know, but I
Right.
wasn't, because who would have suspected Peter Pettigrew, the
The
Neville of
rat.
the group,
Right. Right.
um, and so you miss that entire plot point, and then you miss the interplay between Snape and why they don't like each other, how you don't realize that Sirius almost got Snape killed, any
Right.
of that. You don't talk about that or whatever. Um, I like that Harry does, attack Snape, but I wish all of them had, because
Right.
it was Harry attacks Snape, not Harry, Ron, and Hermione attacks Snape, and they kind of do it all together, united,
Right.
like you miss the culmination of all of that, and then Harry saves Peter Pettigrew at the end, even though everyone else was, you know, Hermione was willing to let him die, Ron was willing to. Of
Hmm.
course, Ron is disgusted that
Right.
you don't get that interplay of like Ron's rat that was a huge betrayal.
Hmm.
Ron is like mortified that he's been sleeping in the same bed as this creepy man for the last however long, and like,
Hmm.
and then you miss all of that, and then the hope that Harry has only to be dashed at the end.
Right.
I don't know. What do you think? I feel like I've been chatting too much.
No, I agree with you. The biggest missed opportunity with all of this is not explaining the Fidelius charm. Um, you have to have that in there. I can overlook a lot of the things that you say about, like, yeah, Harry, Ron, and Hermione all attacking Snape, that's how it happened, but it's
Right,
not it's not an important plot point, right?
right,
The big one, and if I had to choose between all of the things that you talked about, the biggest one that I think you have to have in there is the Fidelius charm, because then it gives again, and these are the things that fall out are the character motivations, the character growth, and the relationships between the characters. That's why Harry is so pissed at Sirius, is because there was an actual betrayal. Like,
right.
they he finds out, like, okay, yeah, sure, he was Harry Potter's godfather, and it's like, okay, yeah, that's a big deal, but the Fidelius charm multiplies it 1,000 times,
Yeah,
and I think that's a missed opportunity that they kind of just glossed over. So if I had to pick one thing, probably from the entire film, well, no, I'd say the Harry, Hermione, Ron character growth is more important. But aside from that, if I had to pick one other plot point to add in, couldn't make it an extended edition. You have to stay within normal film length. I would say you have to put in the Fidelius charm, because it adds so much weight to the entire plot.
right. No, you say that, and I agree. That does. It's like, yeah, Sirius was a supporter of you know who or whatever, and then, whatever. But you find out that he was the one. He went to Voldemort and said, I can hand you the Potters, you
Right,
know, and betrayal, it is. It is a betrayal. But you need that. And then you need that shift from, you know, yeah, I as good as killed him because I thought, of course everyone's gonna come after me, but who's gonna go after Peter? You know,
right,
but Peter was the mole. Peter was the traitor. And as soon as he was made the secret keeper, he goes to Voldemort. Voldemort knows exactly where to find him. I agree. I think that is the biggest missed opportunity of the entire film. But then the only other nitpicky thing I have is, and I just remembered it. I was going to bring it up when we were talking about the Dementors, is that the way that the Dementors kiss seems to work, or them sucking out the soul, seems like they're attacking and trying to suck out Harry's soul the entire time, right?
right,
But that's not necessarily how it happens in the book, because just being around them and the presence is what is driving, bringing up Harry's memories and causing him to pass out and stuff. Not them actively trying to suck out his soul. They don't try and suck out anyone else's soul,
right.
but it's like they're doing that throughout the entire film. And then you get to the end and they're still sucking out his soul and Sirius's or whatever, and the same mechanism happens. Maybe that's a nitpicky thing again, but
I think I know what you mean, though. They made the Dementors a lot less sentient than I think they are in the books. There's a more implied sentience in the books than in the films. They're kind of just they're more just animalistic.
right.
They just go after whoever. But um,
It's not a big thing, but I'm just, as I'm going through the end of the movie and you have the scene where Harry thinks he's seeing James, but it's really him and the time turner.
mhm,
And it's that point where it's like, I wish they hadn't used the same mechanism of, that you could see the face blurring and the whatever every time a
mhm,
Dementor is near Harry. And then that's what they're doing to Sirius. And
right.
So anyway, it's just a nitpicky thing towards the end of the movie that I would have changed. But then, like you said, I loved the way that they showed the different perspective. And
Right.
I love how they showed from A to Z, or not A to Z, from you see Hermione punching Draco, and you know how they are when they're trying to hide from and steal Buckbeak, and they like those little things. I think that second perspective was really interesting and fun. Um, and I don't think I can complain about anything for the rest of the movie, except for maybe how devastated Snape is when he realizes that Sirius Black escaped.
Yeah.
Because you don't talk about that, and you don't talk about how, you know, you kind of have this subplot of Snape trying to, you know, he is creating the potion for Lupin so that he just turns into a wolf instead of a werewolf.
Hmm.
He keeps his mind or whatever. Um, but you kind of have this like, I'm so mad that they got away and what happened, and you kind of miss that anger that shows that Snape did not change at all.
Well, and it's the reason why Lupin has to resign is because
Right,
Snape lets all the parents know that, hey, there's a teacher here who's a werewolf.
right,
And so, yeah, I'm with you. It's another small amount of time that they could have thrown in there to just show that, yeah, Snape is not a good dude.
right,
He he has not changed at all.
right,
And I guess that's the main difference between Alan Rickman's Snape and Book Snape is Book Snape doesn't change.
right,
He stays being a bad guy who does the right thing begrudgingly
right.
the whole time.
The whole time. And yeah, no, I absolutely agree. But anyway, Zach, I think we're about out of time with discussions. Let me talk, not talk. Let me ask, is there anything else you want to say, a final word before we sign off on this movie? This one was hard for me because it's actually one of my favorite movies in the entire series,
I'm with you.
but it straddles that line between they did a really good job of capturing the essence of the book, but missing the mark in just a few places.
Right.
And it's hard to make the change, but as you get into the bigger books, the next four books, that changes. There are more things that I would have made and focused on rather than uh, you know, the choices the other directors made moving forward. So this one was hard for me, but final word, Zach. What were your thoughts?
I mean, overall, it was great. I it's an interesting thing. Like I said at the beginning, it's a good film. It is an excellent film if it was just a film by itself. But as far as adapting the books, you miss the character development, and I think that's its weakest point. You have to have the character development, or else it's just a nice film. You miss the essence of the characters in the books without some of those key plot points. But those are my gripes, and those are the things that I would choose to fix. But we want to hear from all of you listeners. What would you change? What were your biggest problems with the Prisoner of Azkaban film adaptation? And what are your suggestions on how to fix it? Leave us a comment, like and subscribe. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.
All right, we appreciate all of you who are listening. If you have a movie or something you want us to, fix next, let us know. Drop your suggestions in the comment. You can email us at Quill and Hammer podcast at gmail.com. And we will see you back again next week.